what would you do with your days if time and money is no issue? You can do anything you want and you're not going to fail. What would that be? It's an amazing thing to watch people come to life by asking that. And then there's, sometimes they're like, well, I don't know. Then we start asking questions like, well, what do other people say you're good at doing? What do other people notice about you? What do you find yourself, gravitating toward if you have an extra afternoon besides cleaning the house? Some people, might always seek out a concert to go to. Some people might, well, okay, you're a music lover. You find yourself wandering an art museum, maybe it's art. There's a lot of different ways. And then, of course, there's the spiritual gifts that God has given us. We have the natural passions and talents. And then there's the spiritual side. And there are a lot of online gift assessments that a person can just go in. They're free. And you can go online and search that out and take the gift assessment.
Do you ever wonder where God is at when life is flipped upside down? I'm Sherry, your host, and I created this podcast so that my guests and I could look at the good God we profess through the lens of pain and suffering. What I have learned both firsthand and through the personal stories of my guests is that the God of the Holy Bible speaks beautiful things in the dark. God invites us to give him our pain because he's the only one who can transform the very thing that was meant to destroy us. Our challenge is to trust him in the process so that we might come to understand who he really is versus who we think he should be. Listen in and discover the countless ways in which we can find God in our pain. My guest, Dr. Mel Tavares, is an award-winning author, speaker, teacher, and coach, and she sat down with me and provided a very informative conversation about entering our 50s and 60s with a healthy mental well-being and ready to explore all the new possibilities set before us. And I chose the empty nester season of life of our topic because of a preliminary conversation with her. Then she had such incredibly encouraging information for women as we enter into our 50s and 60s. And nobody's more aware of the fact that there are fewer years ahead than behind than me, especially since my husband's passing when I was 53 and I'm 60 now. And I had already entered into the empty nester season by a couple of years. And I'm aware that many people feel that the best years are behind us and they feel a little bit lost about the fewer years ahead. But Mel is an incredible help and a source of clarity for women who are wondering how to navigate just harsh transitions and make the most of really every season and beyond. The transition to becoming an empty nester can be a very profound and transformative period in a woman's life because it's often filled with mixed emotions and new challenges. You may be seeing your children off to college or giving some away in marriage. Maybe your employment is going through some changes. Do you want to quit your current job and start that job that you've always wanted to do, changing careers altogether? Or maybe you've decided to start going back to school. And let's not forget the ladies who are also caregivers for their parents. So this particular time in a woman's life can be mentally, emotionally, physically overwhelming. And how do we navigate it all? So Mel and I looked at the question, how can we enter into this season of life equipped to make the most of it? And the first thing we looked at was our mental well-being. Mel makes a distinction between mental health and mental well-being. And I asked her questions such as, where can someone start when trying to pinpoint our gifts and talents? How can we discover what we're created for, especially if we've lost connection with our true selves? And truth is, we've devoted ourselves to those around us, and in doing so, we can lose touch with who we are as an individual woman. And the truth is, we never stop being the individual woman. Even though I was a mom and a wife, I was still Sherry. So then there are times when we find ourselves just stuck. We know something's not working, but we don't know how to get unstuck. And here's something else we talked about. What happens when we forget how to dream? Ultimately, the journey through the empty nest phase is an invitation to embrace change and rediscover oneself. By prioritizing mental well being and adopting a holistic approach, which Mel talks about, individuals can navigate this transition with confidence and joy. It's a time to reflect and dream and step into new roles with a renewed sense of identity and purpose, knowing that the best years are yet to come. Listen in for all the wisdom and insight that Mel has to share. Mel, I reached out to you because of your extensive knowledge and work in equipping people to have a better mental well being and therefore live a more fulfilling life. And this is crucial because there are few things more paralyzing as when your mind is working overtime with fear and worry and anxiety. But the truth is, we can't control our life. So we find ourselves worrying about all the things that we think will happen, even if they never happen. So, what I want to talk about today is the season of life known as empty nesters, or the varying degrees of a woman's typical roles morphing into something different. And I know that happens over the period of our life where our roles change. But I'm looking at the times when our kids are leaving the home, going to college, getting married, or maybe starting jobs that are in a different state, different country. Women who are straddling children, leaving the home, but taking care of elderly parents. It's a time when women wonder if it's too late for us to create something outside of what have been our normal roles. But before we step into all the ways that we can start living our life to the fullest as the individual person God created us to be, let's lay a little bit of groundwork when it comes to mental well being and how we can set ourselves up for the best possible result. You spent many years as a mental health counselor, and then you reevaluated your roles and transitioned into what you felt was the most enjoyable part of helping people with their mental health and their mental well being. And you became a private coach. Would you kindly tell us the basic difference between a counselor and a coach?
Sure. Well, I'll say thank you for having me. I am very passionate about this topic. And so the counseling, mental health counseling would be when a client comes to me and I'm kind of giving the directives and working them through basically what I'm making for recommendations for their life. The difference in coaching is you would come to me and tell me what your goals are, what your aspirations, your dreams, your stumbling blocks that you want to overcome. And then I help you figure out how to get there. My wisdom and my experience comes into play, but you're driving the conversations, you're driving the effort moving forward. Whereas in counseling, I'm the one driving, I'm in the driver's seat. So we switch roles. You become the driver. I'm just the co-pilot helping you figure it out.
And do you think there's different scenarios that you need either one of those, or a different season of life, a different set of concerns?
First of all, I would like to say that can I clarify the difference between mental health and mental well-being? So I'm not for these purposes, for the most part, talking about clinical mental health conditions or diagnoses. In that situation, I think a coach is great, but has to work in partnership with the clinicians also. So, but all of us are, complex creatures created by God to have multifaceted, and our mental health is just as important as our physical health or spiritual health, emotional health. So mental well-being is referring to those of us primarily who do not have a clinical diagnosis, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does. It sounds like and I guess the counselor would give or be able to give medication should there be a need for that.
Counselors cannot actually. You need a psychiatrist. There's a whole team of people that work with a person that has a diagnosis. So a counselor definitely does not ever prescribe or make recommendations other than if there's a team meeting and that counselor is in the meeting. I've been in plenty of meetings where I might make a recommendation, but it's not medication driven. It's really behavioral therapy, if you want to call it that.
Well, thank you for that distinction between those, because that's very helpful to understand where you might need to start. Even though we start with you as a coach, if you saw that there, like you're saying, if you saw that there was someone who needed some different help, you would then steer them in that direction, point them in that direction to get more in-depth help.
I
Yeah.
would definitely do that and have on many occasions. So, for example, if a person is really struggling, even if they've never been diagnosed, but they're struggling with major anxiety, depression, and they're entering a zone of suicidal ideation, I would immediately make a referral, like that moment, and not hesitate. It's not at that point, even though I do have a background um, as a mental health counselor and a crisis counselor, I am not currently licensed and I don't move in that arena. So if a client, if a coaching client comes to me and I uncover some things, I'm going to say, you know what, this is a little deeper than where we go with coaching, and I'm going to make a recommendation for a Christian counselor that can help them.
That's
And I
awesome. And
say
there,
I say Christian counselor, although I served as a secular mental health counselor for a long time. My preference at this point is if there is an option for someone that they get a Christian counselor, because then you're getting the biblical perspective on everything. Whereas a secular counselor is not allowed to bring that up, even if they're a Christian like I am. I couldn't bring it up unless a client specifically brought God up into the conversation, and then I could have a conversation. But I like to give biblical hope.
yes, amen to that. And as believers, we understand too that God created us. So he's the source of our creation. He's going to know us intimately. The word says he knit us together with his own hands. He also created us mind, body, soul, spirit. My point being, like when you bring in a biblical perspective, you're looking at the whole person. You're looking at, from creation to today and everything in between. So to me, that is a huge benefit when you're looking at somebody's mental health and helping them find the way and to achieve the things that you're talking about when someone brings to you this list of concerns in their life. I will call them concerns. That's what I would call mine when I've gone for mental help. With this much more healthier approach, give us a general understanding of the importance of addressing our needs as a whole person versus in sections, if you will.
Well, an immediate, because it's, always on everybody's mind to be eating healthier, becoming healthier as a physically. I'll use that as an example. I have spent a lot of time teaching people the importance of eating healthy, getting rid of the chemicals in the body, because meaning processed foods, and we all know how many chemicals go into our food. People don't realize that intake of the chemicals literally affects our brain and our mood. And oftentimes I see a major improvement in somebody's mental well-being just by them being able to rid themselves of the toxins, if you will, that are in the food. And so I'll use an extreme example of a friend of mine who had a child who was just very labeled ADHD, labeled oppositional defiant, but there was no settling this child down. And she read a study and she was a nurse, but she pulled him out of all foods, did a fast, then introduced whole foods, no chemicals. He is a totally different person today, completely fine.
Wow.
And yet he was, clinically diagnosed and on a lot of medications and things, which were not helping him because the meds were being taken, but then red dye, was being introduced. And then, this chemical, and then all the sugar, and on it went. So if we detox ourselves from as much of that as possible, that alone will boost our mood and in some cases reverse that anxiety and depression, which we would think maybe it's, we're anxious because of what's going on in the world. And in the reality of it, it might be, it's nothing to do with any of that. It's the food. We ate whatever, and it's causing us to feel anxious, unidentifiably anxious.
I love that that's a good point to start at when you're trying to gain clarity or, just check in with your body and your heart, your mind, whatever is racing or you feel anxiety about. And if you start there, that's doable. That's like a mark you can hit when you start changing. Because I know as a woman, when we're running and gunning, guess who gets the last bit of the food? Guess who grabs and goes all the time? It's the moms, the women, because they might make sure everybody else gets everything, but they're going to be just grabbing what little bits and pieces they can get and eat and shoving it in their mouth. Or I'm speaking for myself maybe, but I know that's where my diet pays the price.
Well, that's true. And then what happens is when we become empty nesters, and now that reason for having to grab and go, there's no more soccer games to get kids to or whatever, but the habit is there. We've developed a habit. That's our lifestyle because seemingly out of necessity, that's what we've done. And then even though our lifestyle can slow down, we don't realize that we have to adjust. The same with sleep, right? Oh, I remember when I was a new mom to all these different kids, and it felt like sleep would never happen again. I would never get to sleep through the night. And eventually that time came, but I was in the habit of being up late because of babies and whatever. And to make the adjustment to like, okay, I have to literally make myself determine in my mind, I'm going to sleep 7 to 8 hours a night. If I stay up late, I'm going to sleep in late, but I need to have a consistent sleep pattern because that does affect our mental well-being as well. If we don't sleep or we don't sleep, one night we're going to bed at 9 o'clock and we're awake at 3 in the morning, and the next night we're up until midnight and we're sleeping until 9 in the morning, that our bodies can't handle that very well. And something is going to give, and often it emerges as our mental health suffering.
And that's another doable thing as far as sleep. So you're talking about diet and sleep. And it does take reevaluating different seasons of life or even checking in at certain points in your life in a year, 2 or 3 times to see, hey, how am I doing with my responsibilities? Is there anything I want to increase, anything I want to decrease, something I want to change about my pattern? I even, to your point about things change, but sometimes you don't. Even with after my husband passed away and it was just me. And so I didn't need to cook for two, but I was eating for two. So there was that problem there as well. But as grief has cleared out, that's changed a little bit too. But nonetheless, when things shift, it would be wise to check it out and to see exactly what do you need to do to be taking better care of yourself.
Right, because it's a slow, it's like the frog in the pot of water, right? That whole analogy of like, it just like you turn up the heat, you turn up the heat, and suddenly it's boiling. And we don't always realize when things creep in that are undermining our well-being. I guess I'll say that. It undermines us, and we don't even realize it. The other part we haven't really touched on, a couple of parts. One, the emotional well-being that's directly linked to our physical and our mental. Emotional, you just talked about the grief process. Anybody that's grieving any type of loss is going to be struggling and emotionally vulnerable. And we know that food is directly linked. A lot of times, our food consumption is often a comfort, like we want the comfort. And so we eat to fill that gap and to make ourselves feel better. And again, we're probably not always, I will say, I will go for the carbs and sugar. I'm not going to go for like a couple of blueberries or, I want something that's going to be the comfort food.
Yes.
And that then breaks down and causes all kinds of havoc. And we actually end up feeling worse, not better. And so we're emotional eating. We have to look and say, like, are our emotions stabilized enough? Do we have some game plan in place so that we are looking to the Lord and getting the spiritual food, not the physical food, because the physical food will end up lying to us, right? Fickle friend, and make us think we're going to feel better, and it actually makes us feel worse. And then if we've gained weight, then we feel worse about ourselves, and on the battle goes, when really the Lord can only he can fill that gap for us.
A vicious cycle if we're looking to ourselves to solve our pain and our problems and self-medicate and whatever that looks like for anybody.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what was the other element? We just
The spiritual side of things, that we can, I have met many people who are, they're physically strong. They are go-getters. They seem to have the world by the tail. They're type A personality. Everything is, the house is perfect. Everything is great. And yet they're battling things. And people don't often see that situation. People don't see behind. I don't want to call it a mask because it's not an intentional mask. It's not an intentional facade, but they just keep going. And in the midst of that, they have neglected the spiritual well being. And without that time with the Lord, without intentionally feeding their spirits, then mental stressors do come in. Fear will creep in. Unreasonable amounts of fear and anxiety and depression or feelings of loneliness or hopelessness. And you look and say, well, they've got it all together. What's the problem? And the problem in that case, you can probably trace back to, like, do you have any quiet time during the day? In your very busy schedule, do you take time to just breathe and read the word and listen to worship music and just nurture that relationship with God?
That's a good point because when you're worshiping or sitting in the presence of God, focused on Him, you can't have anxiety. You can't have all the bad stuff that's been weighing on you. And God does tell us, He's the one that carries the yoke. Give it to Him. And so in this time, quiet time with the Lord, where you're just putting that stuff off on Him and then you're worshiping and praying, it's a beautiful few, however many minutes you'll invest in it, you get double the time and reward, if just in the amount of peace it is. Something I want to ask you about, and I'm not sure that this falls under the right category, but when I think about how long that I have held on to trauma from childhood, even, and I'd say just recently, the Lord broke off that last layer of issues of abandonment where Satan wanted to constantly bring it up at certain points to kind of prove, like, oh, look, here we are again. This is what you've always dealt with, kind of thing. Um, as we get to, our 40s, 50s, 60s, and there's still some trauma that has not been healed in our life. And it's holding us back from who we were meant to be, who we are called to be, why we were born at this time. Do you have any advice for someone who is still have a pain and maybe they don't really realize they have a pain, but they have the manifestation of the pain, maybe in the form of a survival skill or something that is not functioning. They know it's not working, but they can't put their finger on it. They're stuck.
I have a couple of recommendations. And, we talked earlier about Christian counselors. A person could go that route and may need to have some one-on-one time to really delve down in and figure out where the root is and get that thing out. But there are some great recovery groups too. And I personally have been affiliated with a couple and have seen remarkable results. My background in pastoral care and counseling, I've seen quite a few people come through. We always, at our church at least, make a recommendation that people, if they can, join one of those recovery groups, which is not just for drug and alcohol addictions, but all manners of hurts and habits and hangups. So one well-known one is Celebrate Recovery. It's a national organization. We have Celebrate Recovery at our church. And so in those small groups and you're working through the steps, that does help. And, not every Celebrate Recovery program might have a trauma and crisis specialist, but a lot of them do. And so because the American Association of Christian Counselors has made it a goal of theirs to have churches across the country have at least one trauma trained person in those groups. So there's that. And then another one is called Regeneration. My daughter's church out in Pennsylvania has that program, and I'm well acquainted with that one. And it's the same idea of the 12 steps and whatever. And as a person works through those steps in small groups and with their mentors, sponsors, whatever we call them, um, a lot of times that's all it takes. If that's not working, and there seems to be a deeper seated situation, I would definitely recommend a Christian counselor. Again, I'm saying a Christian counselor, and there's accessible ones online also, which is great. We've changed. So even if you're in an area that doesn't provide Christian counseling, there are options online. And, again, looking and saying, to be really healed, I believe it has to be a Bible-based effort.
I agree with you 100%. I've even looked at and participated in deliverance ministries, and
Mhm.
that's been a huge breakthrough in some areas for me too, where just a peace that I told the Lord, I said, Lord, I've never known this kind of peace before. I've never experienced it. And so it's not, Satan can't duplicate that. He might, try to give how he always gives faux and fake, whatever, but it is the staying power and the depth of peace it's just beautiful. That's, I tell the Lord all the time, he's beautiful.
Well,
Beautiful.
and if I could say something else about the whole concept of trauma, listen, I have literally worked with thousands of people, primarily women, and unforgiveness is often the root of the situation because, and I'll use an example from my own life if you have a second for me to do that.
Course.
I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. My parents were very ill-equipped at 17 and 20 years old to have children, and yet my mother at the age of 17 had one, had me at 18, had my brother at 19. They partied all the time. There was very poor parenting at best. That's being kind. So a lot of things happened. Now, again, you look at the era of parenting back then. I'm not sure they, would do things the same way today. We don't. Like, it's just different. So, I remember as an adult, I had my children and I was driving to my parents' home one day and I had accepted the Lord and was growing in my faith. And I was driving to their house. And as I crested the hill and I could see the house, I felt that same irritation. I was still trying to honor them. I didn't have a broken relationship with them, but I had a hard time. And the Lord spoke to me. And in the moments that it took to get from where I was within sight of the house to park my car, I had forgiven my mother because he showed me what it must have been like for her at 17 years old to have, well, by 19, had three babies, all in diapers. My dad worked away all week. There was no cell phones. Well, we had no running water and no power in the farmhouse that my dad had grown up in. So she's 10 miles from her family or any of the people she's grown up with. She's a child herself. Can we say that at 18 or 19? They're still children. And she had three of us running around. And he just showed me. And then by the time I went to kindergarten, she was like 24 years old, 25 years old. I'm like, oh, I see. Imagine that kind of a life and the bearing the responsibility while your husband is working away all day and you're barely 19 years old. She dropped out of high school because she was pregnant. She has no driver's license. It's a half a mile to the neighbors in one direction, a half a mile to the neighbor in the other direction. You're isolated. Well, bitterness crept in, and she was not a kind person, but I was able to forgive her. So that's what I mean. Sometimes, unbeknownst to us, we may be harboring bitterness and unforgiveness because of something that happened. And sometimes it's as simple as what happened with me, where the Lord just showed me, like, why don't you put yourself in her shoes?
Yeah.
It's easy to forgive that way. And then there's some that are a lot deeper seated than that.
Right. Yeah. That are layered and layered and they need to be
Mm-hmm.
peeled away. But when you do take that position of trying to see, I can relate to your story as far as my mother being very cruel, but she got pregnant out of wedlock and that was not the era to be pregnant out of wedlock. And then right behind my brother, here I come. So it was not a happy a happy situation in my home. And I think there was bitterness to the point, even as she got later in life, she had a second personality. So it was not a happy home to grow up in. But the Lord gave me a vision of the amount of grief that she was going through, the amount of stress, and so that helped free me from a lot of my resentment to her. And it was a beautiful gift, really. The Lord forgiveness. I guess we think if we let go, they get away with something, but I mean, the
It
beauty.
really frees us more than it
Yeah.
frees them. It does free them, and our relationship definitely improved a lot after that, but it also frees us,
Yeah,
you know?
it
When we can
does.
just love people
Hmm.
regardless of what is going on in, wrongdoings, injustices, all of those things, when we can just love people, genuinely love, and like I said, sometimes we need people to walk us through, or sometimes it's a deliverance like you're talking about, where we're just praying and God lifts it.
I lived with it for many years. I'm sure you lived with it for many years, and then you're having another conversation with the Lord, and then it's lifted at
Yeah.
that point. So
Yeah.
I know God can do supernatural things, but He typically works with me in layers after layer. But all of this to say, the point is that Christians need healing. Just because you became a Christian and God created you as a new creature doesn't mean all of your, what do you call them, habits, hang-ups, and things like that are
Quirks,
gone.
habits, hang-ups. Yep.
Yeah. It doesn't mean they evaporate. It can. I mean, I'm not saying God can do whatever He wants to do, but most of the time He wants to walk you through it. He wants to be gentle in the process. He wants to hold your hand as you have to face these things. Because one of the another beautiful things about the Lord is that He walks you through it. He doesn't ask you to act like it didn't happen. He doesn't ignore the fact that it happened, but He'll take your hand, He'll catch your tears, and He'll walk you right through the middle of it. And who does that for us except, counselors and coaches? But
Right.
Jesus.
And if I could point out, we talked about the ages between 40 and 60, the empty nest zone. I find that there are quite a few, not just myself, but quite a few people that, we've been so busy raising kids, so busy, 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 working. A lot of us had to work and raise kids. It's just a very busy time of life. And once we are able to slow it down and get quieter, that's when a lot of these things, because you look and say, how can, something that didn't seemingly bother me at 20 or 30 is bothering me at 50? Well, because we've slowed down, but that's also a beautiful thing because now it's surfacing and can be healed from that. And, I feel a little bit badly that because I have continued being healed from my mid 40s to now, in some areas, I find that I'm a lot softer and easier with my grandchildren than I was with my own children because whether we like it or not, those things that are lurking that we don't know are weighing on our mental well-being actually are. And so we maybe are less patient with our kids. We maybe have not had the energy to do some things. And then suddenly we're like, oh, and I've read for years and now I'm hearing it from my kids. Like basically, can I say, you're a lot nicer than you were.
I do. Somebody said something to me about the difference between raising your kids and your grandkids. I said, the only thing I can put my finger on is I don't have the burden of discipline. I don't have to worry about everything they eat. I don't have to, stand guard against, because nobody's your friend when you're raising kids. They want your kids to be billboards. They want to sell your kids everything under the sun. So my thing is like, nobody's your friend when you're trying to raise kids, and then you end up looking like the bad guy maybe. But the grandkids, like the parents got it. Like they're the ones driving the discipline and the boundaries but we just get to have a little bit of fun. So I do love this particular season of my life. How many grandchildren do you have? Because you have a big family.
We have a blended family. I'm in a second marriage, a beautiful second marriage. Um, 11. So
11.
the youngest is 9 months old, and I have him every Monday because mommy has gone back to work. So they have four in that household. They're four in there. And so, yeah, they're 11 and they range up to age 19. So 9 months to 19,
Okay.
a whole gamut. And
20. Yeah.
somehow it feels like that's not even possible because I feel like just yesterday I was raising my own, but I will say that my youngest is only 25. So they range in age. And so I've only been an empty nester for 3 years, three and a
Okay.
half years. I had grandchildren while I was still raising my own children.
Well, that is a big, beautiful family. Something that you mentioned to me when we were talking, and I want to share it right now because it's very encouraging. It was encouraging to me then, and I just know it's going to be encouraging for some ladies today. But you said Harvard did a study about women entering into their 50s. They were entering their most productive decade, and their 60s entering into their second most productive decade. That's pretty exciting news. Tell us about it.
Well, I think there's an awful lot of people who feel, especially again, if we've devoted ourselves identity wise to being the mom and the wife of, whatever, we're maybe working or not working outside of the home, but either way, that's been our identity. And then when we become empty nesters, we're like, yeah. And it feels like maybe we're too old to do something else. Some people might feel like, oh, life just passed me by. And now, you know, I'm midlife and I haven't done what I wanted to do. But I was so encouraged to read those statistics and see that the results of that study because we are not too old and because we are not devoted like you just were talking, we may have grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whomever, adult children that we're still influencing or maybe helping out, but the level of responsibility is so different that it frees us up time wise to be able to put our efforts into something else. And that's what they mean by productive. Not that we haven't been productive the years that we're raising our families, but, for example, I mean, I'm a writer amongst other things, and I have found that many of my colleagues are 50 plus. Many did not start writing a book at all until they were at least 50, and many not until they were 60 or 62 or whatever retirement age. So it's amazing to me that some people would say that we're done or pretty much done. But I have friends who have decided to go back to medical school, become RNs. I know a person who became a doctor and she was, I think, 55 when she started school. Started and always wanted to be a medical doctor. And I was like, well, nothing's stopping you, right? And we might think like, what's the point in doing that? You've got what, 6 years or whatever of schooling. Okay, that puts you at 62. You still, and we're not done at 62. If a person wants to be a doctor at 62, then you've got a solid 15 or 20 years to enjoy a second career. Why not? So, yeah, I find it very fascinating. And also, we've learned some tricks of the trade. We know how to manage our time. We've raised children and juggled all the things. We're good time managers. And so we can be more productive just by implementing that one thing of like, we can cook our food from scratch, keep our house clean, watch the grandkids a day or maybe 2 days a week, and still do XYZ and people look at me and they're like, oh, you're so busy. And I'm like, I manage my time well. I'm more productive at 60 because I know how to manage my time.
Some women, some of my listeners are wondering, what is my purpose? What was I created for? What are some suggestions or maybe questions to ask ourselves about how can we discover our gifts, our talents, our passions?
I literally love working with people that are trying to figure that out. It is probably one of my top things I love doing because I say this. So, again, somebody that's looking and saying, what am I going to do with this second part of life? If your purpose isn't, and we were not created, although we do have children, we're not created to be just to be a mom. And there's plenty of single women that have never had children. So then it's not that we're created and our purpose isn't for moms, but it's looking and saying, okay, if you could do anything that you want to do, and time is no issue, money is no issue. If you could just have it look like you want it to, what would that be? Oh, and you're not going to get paid to do it. What would you love to spend every day doing? Time and money is no issue. What would make you want to get out of bed in the morning and do that? There's the beginning, and often the end goal right there in that answer. If somebody was like, oh, I don't know, why go home and think about it? What would you do with your days if time and money is no issue? You can do anything you want and you're not going to fail. What would that be? It's an amazing thing to watch people come to life by asking that. And then there's, sometimes they're like, well, I don't know. Then we start asking questions like, well, what do other people say you're good at doing? What do other people notice about you? What do you find yourself, gravitating toward if you have an extra afternoon besides cleaning the house? Some people, might always seek out a concert to go to. Some people might, well, okay, you're a music lover. You find yourself wandering an art museum. Maybe it's art. There's a lot of different ways. And then, of course, there's the spiritual gifts that God has given us. We have the natural passions and talents. And then there's the spiritual side. And there are a lot of online gift assessments that a person can just go in. They're free. And you can go online and search that out and take the gift assessment. And it will often, give you the gifting area that aligns with what you just said. Like, oh, if I could do anything, I would like to XYZ. I would like to start a daycare. I would like to be a writer, if that's me. I would like to be able to, run a women's Bible study. I would love to start a soup kitchen. Our community doesn't have one. All your friends say you're great at cooking. You've had these jobs where you've learned organizational skills. What's stopping you? If you want to start a soup kitchen, what's stopping you? Nothing. Literally nothing.
And I have found out that God wastes nothing. Your gifts and talents are going to coincide with exactly what He's called you to do. All of your past jobs or the way you have invested in your loved ones, your family, all of that is going to be used for the next step in the direction for that thing that is going to light you up, because I believe that God does lead us in that direction. God folds even my mistakes into the process.
Rick Warren wrote a book called Purpose Driven Life. I don't know if you're familiar or the
I am.
listeners. I love that book. I have taught that Bible study so many times, and therein lies my passion of helping people figure out their purpose. And the first line of that book kind of sums it up. He says, it's not about you. Oh, so then we know that our purpose, if it's not about us, we're not created for us, we're created for others. So we know it's going to be something that will be outwardly focused, that will help others. And it's in one way or another ending up serving the Lord and His purposes, whether it's in the marketplace or in our home or out in the community or in a church. We're going to find our purpose, but oftentimes that purpose is going to be in the things that we literally love doing. We love doing it. It's not an effort. It's something that brings joy to us and to other people, and it meets needs.
You've been asking them, what are you dreaming of doing? What is your sweet spot? Where's your happy place? What is your love language? And all of these things so that they can discover that. And one thing I'd like to suggest to my listeners is to look in the place where you feel the least credited or the least able to, like you have no confidence in that area, because I feel like Satan knows us, and like God knows. Satan's always watching, listening. He looks at our life and whatnot, our habits. And so he knows the ways that God has gifted us and what our weaknesses are. And so if he's tried to kill the dream that God put in you and the gifts and the talents that he has already given you, definitely go back and revisit those places, because sometimes you find that is indeed what was trying to happen, that Satan was going to kill off any sort of inclination or hint that you might get in the area that you are gifted and talented. So it's worth a look if you ask me.
That's wisdom. Thank you for that. That is pure wisdom there. And to tag on to that, it's like, listen, the truth is that those areas that we're being called into, those purposes, can use yourself as a podcaster. We can use, my coaching and writing and speaking and all the different things I'm doing. I don't have any confidence in and of myself anyway. It that has to come from the Lord. And oftentimes our purpose and our assignments, if you will, are much bigger than our capability in and of ourselves because God creates things that way. He wants us to depend on him, and he's in the driver's seat, and we're needing to trust him to show us step by step, open the doors and help us grow. So yeah, if we only did the things in life that we were not afraid of, then we might not do so much at all. You know, it's it's interesting when you think about the responsibility, back to thinking about children. It's interesting that we, you know, will have a baby, no problem getting pregnant and having a baby and bringing a living human being into the world that we need to then raise for 18 years. I mean, why aren't we daunted by that? And so if we can do something like that, or, you're offered a promotion at work and you step into, being a project manager of some big ginormous thing, but then when it comes to what our purpose in the kingdom is and what God might have us to do, we're like, oh no, I can't do that. And so you're right. Sometimes that's the enemy in our ear, like, you would not be able to do that. And that's why, it says plans fail for a lack of counsel, right? In Proverbs, it says plans fail for a lack of counsel. So it's good to have friends that we bounce things off from, a couple of people. Avoid the naysayers. That's, not helpful. And get some good, solid, wise counsel and ask other people, what do you see me doing?
That's such a good distinction too, because it's valuable information. It's a way that we can step into a new phase with a lot more confidence. I think sometimes you need a friend, one who will be honest with you, and that's my sister, because not everybody's able to stand in that sort of space for you. Nobody, a lot of people don't have the strength.
Or maybe they're not at your level. They're maybe they can't see what the plan of God is for your life because they're not there. They can't picture themselves doing it, and therefore they can't picture you doing it. Maybe they've never seen you do it, and some of those hidden talents and things because you've been busy doing other things. And then, but we know when God speaks to us, when the Holy Spirit speaks to us, we know sometimes, oftentimes with no explanation, really. It's just like, this is what I need you to do. Now go do it. And it's, we just have to obey. And
Yeah.
so we do need those people. And that's why I say, it's not that it's a bad thing to have family members or friends that are not Christians, but if we can find two or three that are equally yoked, their walk with the Lord is kind of on our level, then we've got wise counsel. And then I would say one step further, if there's a local pastor or somebody, sometimes, as those plans unfold and you move toward, it becoming a reality, then it's good to go to somebody else again, a coach, a counselor, a pastor. And I say a counselor like a pastoral counselor, not a mental health counselor, but to just then say, hey, this is what the Lord is showing me. This is what other people that know me are seeing. What do you think? And just you don't have to take their feedback if it doesn't resonate in your spirit, but if you've got a spiritual advisor, then that's a good thing.
Definitely, because if you, like you're saying, wise counsel, you need to seek wise counsel. You're right. When God speaks, you know when God speaks. Like there's no confusion about that. But there are times along the way when I'm having the Lord, do I do this or do I do that? I think he thinks I'm too needy. I'm asking him for every step of the way. He's like, child, you're not on milk anymore. Get out there. Get it done.
He
Well,
loves us though, so he's willing to guide us,
it's
right? Every step of the way, and he's patient. I'm thankful.
very
Very thankful.
extravagantly patient. Yes.
Yes.
I do feel his joy when you're walking alongside of him and he's having that opportunity to grow in relationship with you and intimacy with you because yeah, there's just times when I'm not getting anywhere until he moves his hand. So
Well, and isn't it interesting that many of us, myself included, yourself included, many of us think, we do things in our own effort first, and then when it doesn't work out, then we pray. But if we would just do
such a good
what we're instructed to do and like wake up and we spend our time with the Lord to set the precedence for the day, it'll go so much better. And
oh,
I
yes.
remember again raising kids like, boy, just having to set the alarm a few minutes and hope that a baby didn't wake up everybody's sleep for that few minutes because this is my time, and oftentimes having to use that commute time to work, or the bathroom break, whatever it is, like showering and spending your time with the Lord at the same time. It's a joy as I've gotten older to have the time, but then it becomes a discipline to make sure I use the time that I now have and set my day in the right order,
Mm.
and just it'll go so much better. But yeah, I'm not always a quick learner.
I can get in that line with you right there. So speaking of ordering our time, what is the importance of goal setting?
Well, I think, we've been talking about what's the purpose and all of that. To me, and I'm a huge advocate of goal setting. I have a book, well, a workbook that I've done for the last couple of years with people, 6 weeks, six goals. I love that model. I'm not saying that because I wrote it. I'm saying I like that. It's something I've learned over the years, that we have our ultimate goals and then you break them down into doable action steps, and achieving that will propel us to the next. So goals take our ideas and our dreams and help them become reality. But, there's a lot of people who set the goals the wrong way. So we know the SMART goal model. If you don't, a listener doesn't know that, they can look it up. But it has to be something that's measurable, achievable, all of that right away. So, I would, I operate on that and all areas of life. So I do that with my writing. I do that with my personal physical health. I do that with my family. And it may sound silly, we have 7 adult children, we have 11 grandchildren, and I say as 7 adults, but their partners, it's a
Mhm.
big family. If I don't set goals, literally set goals to like, okay, I'm going to have at least a weekend that I get to spend with each one of these kids throughout a year. If I don't then set goals and say, I want to have at least 3 or 4 family gatherings where as many whosoever can all show up and we're having a big day together. If I don't do that, it's not going to happen. I have to plan it. I have to purpose it first. Like, I'm going to do this. And then I have to look at the calendar, set dates, and then let everybody know, and then take all the steps that it's going to take to make it a successful day. That's what I have to do. So even in the family arena, I set those goals and say, and then people are like, wow, wow, you had like a party and then you were at a conference and then you went to this other kid's house and I'm like, yes. And they're like, how do you do all that? I'm like, because I set goals. And
So they're
I look at it and say, I can do this. These are top goals for 2025. These are the things I want to happen. And how am I going to make that happen? And then I chain it backwards and break it down. And a lot of times I'll then work in a 6-week segment. And that's a personal thing, I think. But for everybody, 6 weeks is attainable. When we get into like, oh, 6 months from now, I lose my motivation. 6 weeks, I can keep pretty motivated.
I agree. 6 weeks, I can hang in there for 6 weeks on that.
Right.
It sounds like when you have these goals in place, they're targets that you can hit and you're putting them in place so that it gives you more success. You're able to focus on that, prepare for that, plan for that. So that's huge. And then breaking it down. What happens if somebody forgot how to dream, forgot how to dream about their plans and stuff, and they're just lost? They don't even know how to, they don't even know if they have dreams anymore.
Right. So then we have to talk it out and talk it out and dig down. And a lot of times, just by listening to someone, I can discern, like, oh, okay. Because I'll say, oh, tell me about a great day you had in the last year. What made it great? All those sorts of things. You start digging down, somebody might say, oh, well, it was great because I went to the garden center and I got all these, you know, plants. And they might say that. Or it might be like, a great day was when I went to my garden and I harvested everything. I'm saying that because I love gardening. So a great day was I went out and I picked a bushel of stuff. And I'm like, okay. And now I'm beginning to realize, like, oh, you love gardening and you're good at it if you could actually raise the food. And so then I start asking questions, and eventually something's going to emerge that you say, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? If somebody's searching and trying to figure it out. I had somebody say to me once, they said, oh, what are the kinds of things you have on your bucket list? Someday I'll do these things. And they talked about them. And then I was like, oh, well, let's pick one and plan it. A trip, just a trip. And the person said to me, if I cross that off my bucket list, if I do it, what else will I have to look forward to? And I said, what sense does it make to keep everything on a bucket list and never do any of them? That's what you're hoping for? Do you know that you can go do the things on your bucket list? Or maybe it's not go do, maybe it's, I'll say this, my husband is Portuguese. We've been married 16 years. I do not know how to cook any Portuguese food. And it's terrible so I have a goal this year. I said, tell me an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert that you would like me to be able to cook you anytime you want it. And he gave them to me. And then I went to my sister-in-law's, his sisters, and I said, I'm going to need some help.
Smart woman.
See, so if you have, learned how to do those things and they move off your bucket list and now they're achieved, what do you have to look forward to is fill up your bucket list again. Add some new things, new recipes to try, new trips to do, new crafts to learn. I mean, whatever it is. See, but so sometimes we have to do some heavy duty talking to get people to be able to dream again. But it's a sad thing to me when somebody says, well, I didn't really have any dreams. Or sometimes they won't dream the why. Why aren't you dreaming? Because it never happens anyway. Something always happens and ruins it. I'd rather not try than to have it not happen. I don't have enough heart left to try again and feel that hopeless. It's just easier. It doesn't hurt to not dream, but it hurts to dream and then see it collapse and not go the way I thought it would.
That's so sad. I don't know which one's sadder. Not to
Yeah.
have dreams or not to, or purposely not have dreams.
Well, and that's why we have to look and say it can't be ours. I'm pretty big on this. It can't be ours. God already knows the plans he has for us, plans and the purposes to bring us a hope, a future. And if we can trust him and hear him and discover what he created us to do and the things he would like to bestow upon us, then those are not going to fail. Those won't fail. And it can be a recreational thing like going on a trip. It can be a new business venture. something like starting your podcast. It can be a lot of things, but those won't fail if God is in the middle of it.
The more we can align our desires with God's desires, the more we get to discover who He created us to be before we entered sin, pierced that sin veil and had to live in sin separated from Him until we received Him again. But we get to walk in a stronger identity with who He is and who He created us to be, and therefore fulfill our purpose. So, I mean, that's a beautiful thing for sure.
It's exciting when we can move in our purpose and we can, feel like we are strong, holistically strong, and we're just flowing in the goodness of God, right?
Yes.
We're in a whole new season of like the burdens have lifted, the
Yes.
joy is there, and it's a process to get to that, but then walking it out every day is just so fulfilling. So it's
Mm.
worth some of the struggle to get the answers we're seeking and to take the action steps we have to be able to be holistically well.
Mm.
And then life is great. Doesn't
Yeah.
mean life doesn't happen to us. Things happen, circumstances happen, but it doesn't have to steal our joy and it doesn't have to take away our purpose,
And it doesn't have to stay that way. There are seasons. And plus, God always has a plan of redemption, always.
right?
So, but when I think about somebody not having dreams, I don't know, that makes me feel very lonely. And so, how can we avoid loneliness and depression? How can we become engaged in community where we might be trying to discover where we want to serve? Because I know it's not just going to materialize out of thin air, because our emotions can cause us to isolate. And of course, we know that it's Satan's playground in our mind if we're isolated from people and truth. So we've got to take action. Do you have any suggestions on where or how to get connected to people, to life, to community?
Well, the obvious one to me is the local church. And I realize our church is great. I hope every listener has a great church. But our mission statement is that our purpose, we exist to create, to connect people with Christ first, family, meaning the family of God, and with purpose. That's why we exist, to connect people with Christ's family and purpose. And everything we do, everything we give as opportunity is going to achieve that. So when you go to a local church, I mean, not you're meeting people. Um, if you have a hard time meeting people, and not everybody's extroverted, some people are introverted. We, you know, we find, and I think it's a global thing, if we serve side by side with other team members, whether you're going out and serving, you know, the homeless in the community, or whether you're greeting people at the door, or you're serving communion, or you're helping orchestrate some event, you're going to meet other people that way. And so it gives you a purpose, maybe a short term or maybe a longer term purpose, but it gives you a purpose of why you're getting out of your house and going to do something. And you're going to talk to people while you're there. And if you're doing something that aligns with your heart's desire, that you love doing, then you're going to find like-minded people, hopefully, at least some of the people, if not everyone on that team, are also going to be doing it because they love doing it. So now you've got connections with people. So I would say that for people that have a church that's maybe smaller or more rural, certainly, I mean, I've always worked in the arena of with nonprofits, either for nonprofits or with nonprofits, and they are all looking for volunteers. So again, looking and saying whether it's we have a women's crisis pregnancy center that some people work at. We have certainly the clothing closets, the soup kitchens, the food banks, all of the things like that. But, I knew a person once who all she did was she went to the hospital that was nearby, and went and held babies. Do you know there's a volunteer position to hold babies in the neonatal unit?
I have heard that, but I don't know anybody who does it.
My former sister-in-law held babies. That's what she did, is she went and held the little tiny
Oh,
neonatal babies. And that's such a need. So there's always something. And we can't feel lonely if we get out and volunteer somewhere. Gotta be with people.
one of the things that I have seen over and over again through my podcast guests is that God takes the trauma of your life and uses you in that context to then minister and help other people, whether they're entering into the same thing you went through, maybe they're stuck in the middle of it, maybe they're coming out of it. But God uses things about our life to transform us and then to help us help others. So that's something too. Don't ever let any of your trauma or your pain or your loss from the past keep you from reaching people in that area as well, because it's very beneficial. If you've been there and done that and the Lord has healed you, you're a testimony for somebody who needs to hear that sort of encouragement.
Well, and in full transparency here, I'll say that that is exactly how I have arrived at where I'm at. Because I like to say I've walked some roads. It has been I shared about my childhood, and that did not change because I was then ill-equipped myself and walked into a marriage that probably was definitely not of God. Seemed like a good idea at the time, but was not compatible, was not workable. And then there's career choices that I've had to pivot and make shifts and just different things along the way. And I've been through a lot of grief, lots of family members and parents, others that have passed away that has just caused a lot of trauma and grief. I have a nephew that drowned when he was only 14, and my own brother had to pull his son out of the lake, all those sorts of things. And so I've seen a lot, and I don't have any regrets. I mean, I feel like God has allowed that. And out of those places, even like I said, becoming an empty nester 3.5 years ago and saying, how do I reimagine myself in my later years then? What am I going to do? What do I want to do? So that allows me to walk other people through. I've been through a lot, and I'm not ashamed of that. God has delivered me from a lot. And so therefore I can relate to a lot of people and say, listen, firsthand that. And then I do have the Bible school training because I felt like, you got to be able to rightly divide the word of God to be able to help someone. And I want to be able to bring the biblical hope. So I've walked with the Lord for 35 years. I've done 9 years of Bible school and got my doctorate. But I also have my life experience. So when you meld that together, I'm like, yep, this is what I do. I help people.
A solid testimony. And truth be told, that's how this podcast was birthed, as well as this business that I'm looking at trying to launch out of my experiences with finding that God is in the midst of pain and grief and suffering and trauma, that he enters in. Nothing about the brokenness of this life negates his sovereignty and his beauty, but he brings that into the pain and the trauma, and that's how he transforms us.
Amen. That's
So,
so on point. Yep.
and that's what I want people to know, like through this conversation with you as well, that God cares. God cares that you're in this season, and God can make a difference, and he's willing to reveal himself to you. He wants to show you the path that he's had you on, and that now he's going to bring you into a full understanding of what your calling is on your life. So before we wrap up, what are some anxiety busters? What are some examples?
Well, I mean, I'm a very practical person, and I think that God is a practical God. So it's not complex. Anxiety busters, simple things are, and we've talked about some of it, you know, if we eat right, if we sleep well, if we get outside of our own four walls and go outside, just even if we're not in the community, if we're just out on our steps, breathing in the air, it shifts our brain. Literally, it makes a shift in the brain. And then being with other people, having, there's got to be some level of purpose. And I have said, I do believe that goals stabilize us. They stabilize. And so you'll feel the anxiety lift as you begin to implement seemingly unrelated activities. Like, what does any of this have to do with my anxiety? Well, and then I'll say another big one. It's huge to me. Shut off the news. Shut it up. Shut down the social media. Shut down the news. Tune it out because most of it's rhetoric anyway. It's not good for us to absorb that much. And it's a lot of it is driving the fear and the anxiety in our society that we're seeing an epidemic in this country right now, a complete epidemic of anxiety, fear, and depression, hopelessness. And a lot of it is stemming from the media. So I'm not saying, I use media myself. So I'm not saying don't, I'm saying balance that out and be careful what you let into your head because it's not healthy. And I haven't seen the world stop spinning on the days that I decide to step away from all of that. The world is still spinning, things are still happening, but my anxiety level goes way down when I just decide I'm not participating. But you know what? I'm not stressed out about anything. This is what I do. I read headlines. So I realized, oh, there was a big earthquake in Tibet. I didn't know that. I did not read the entire thing and I did not turn on the news to watch it for, 5 hours. I am keenly aware of the fires in California right now because I have a lot of friends that are in the zone. And I have been praying, but you know what I'm not doing? I'm not on a device or watching the TV every second and feeling that anxiety build of what's going on. I'm like, I can't live there. I can't live there. Just have to step away.
I remember after my husband passed away in early 2018, I promise you I didn't turn the TV on for 2 years. And when I came back around to watching TV, I was like, wow, nothing's changed.
See?
I was looking at it, I was like, oh, we still got that problem, this problem, that problem, that problem. And God is as powerful as he was the day I disconnected never turned the TV on. And the day I turned it back on, he was still in control and still in charge. And I kid you not, it looked like nothing had changed. It was the same
Isn't
old
it?
conversation.
That's amazing. And you touched on something earlier that I think is a huge anxiety buster, and that is the music. When we're in the presence of God, and for me at least, music is very therapeutic. It keeps me centered. I like to listen to I'm talking Christian music that is well-written songs. They revert back to the Bible, biblical principles. It keeps my mind focused on what is actually important and what is not. And it keeps me reminded constantly that God is in control. It may look like everything is chaotic. It may look like the world is spinning out of control. It may look hopeless. It's not. He's in complete control of our individual circumstances and the nation and the global. It's okay. So I just turn my music on, bake my cookies for my grandkids, write my books, do the podcast, and let the world spin.
You're busy doing the work of the Lord and fulfilling your calling while the world is being the world, and you can't change it anyway. Only God can change that. So that to me takes that yoke off of you because it does become a yoke. You're listening to things and watching things, and little by little, it's just creeping an extra weight, an extra weight, an extra weight. Do you have no influence, no input, no ability to change it, but yet you're wearing the weight of it? And
Yes.
so you're very wise in not having to, like, I'm a headline skimmer as well. And I pray for people in situations. I pass accidents and pray for people, or I see the ambulance going somewhere and I'm like, Lord, thank you that you're already there, being you, doing your thing.
That's right.
I have to talk about this before we leave. I know I've kept you longer, but allow me this few more minutes. You have several books, but the one that catches my eye is the 21 Days to Improve Mental Well-Being. And I like that fact because there's a time frame put on it. And I know that, like we were talking earlier, I can commit to 21 days. And so tell us a little bit about this 21-day improved mental well-being.
Well, I chose the 21 days because we all have been taught 21 days to create a habit. I disagree in that I think it's 21 days to start a habit. It's not 21 days to create. It takes longer, to stay in the groove. But if we commit ourselves to 21 days of being very intentional and taking some very intentional steps, some of which we've talked about today, then we will feel a shift. We will improve our mental well-being. Mental health, mental well-being, however one wants to term it. But there are things like, do we intentionally take a day a week and have a Sabbath? Do we just step away and say, I'm not doing all these other things? We sometimes get in a groove of like, I'm so tired. My brain can't take anymore. I'm so overwhelmed. And I'm like, have we stopped? We're commanded to stop. It's not a suggestion. And yet I have to intentionally carve that time out on my calendar. For me, it's Saturdays. That's like an off limit. I don't want to do work. I'm very involved in our local church. So Sunday is like 7 a.m. until 2 p.m. We're just very full speed ahead. Sometimes a couple hours in the afternoon after that. It's busy. It's another day. But Saturday is like that. I just have to rest. I have to just shut it down and, be introspective. We allow that time, we will see an improvement. It's not, we will. Plenty of things can bring us down. We have to be very intentional to counteract that.
Well, I'm very interested in that. I'll put the links in the show notes too, but I'd like to get that link from you once we finish here. Is there anything that I have not asked you about that you want to make sure that we talk about or that you share?
I would say the only thing that I would want to say to people is there's always hope. If there's anyone feeling hopeless about their situation, about life circumstances, about their future, about God's plan, whatever it is, I want people to know there's always hope. God has a plan and he has a purpose. He created us for that. And there's always hope. Reach out to somebody. Don't sit and wallow in this alone. No matter what you're facing in life, no matter what trauma you've faced, no matter what roads you've had to walk down, no matter how bleak and hopeless it seems and how crazy the world seems around you, there's always hope, and we can stay very focused and walk in God's plans and purposes and let everything else just spin around us.
Those are beautiful parting words, because I know that that's going to encourage a heart today to stay in the fight, if you will, or stay in the lap of the Lord. Recline in the Lord. Just rest. Just lay it down. He's got a plan. Mel, thank you so much for being here today. I deeply appreciate your time and your insight and your information. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you for your time and for sharing this experience with my guest. I hope you have found encouragement for today and a deeper revelation of God's heart in the midst of pain and suffering. We'd love to have you as a subscriber to Finding God in Our Pain so that you can be connected with all my guests as they share their personal experiences and professional knowledge about pain and suffering. And because this podcast is a division of the website A Life of Thrive, for more information and the various ways you can connect with us, please visit the website alifeofthrive.com. I look forward to sharing more transparent stories from the hearts of women who intimately know what it means to have their world flipped upside down, their authentic struggle to make sense of it, and what recovery and healing looks like. Till then, sweet woman, remember you are not alone and that God speaks the most beautiful things in the dark.